Welcome to the Thought Echo channel. I'm so glad you're joining me for story time today. Whether you're here to relax, learn, or just immerse yourself in a wonderful tale, you're in for a treat. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can join me for more stories and inspiration. Let's begin.
Step into a world where imagination knows no bounds, a world of red sands, twin moons, and ancient civilizations. A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs isn't just a story. It's an epic journey to the mysterious planet of Mars, or as its inhabitants call it, Barsoom. Follow the incredible tale of John Carter, a soldier of Earth who finds himself mysteriously transported to this alien world. There, amidst towering cities and endless deserts, he encounters strange creatures, fierce warriors, and the beautiful yet brave Dejathoris, a princess unlike any other. This timeless classic blends adventure, romance, and science fiction in a way that has captivated readers for over a century. As you listen, prepare to lose yourself in a Martian world where bravery, honor, and love collide against a backdrop of interplanetary war and discovery. So sit back, close your eyes, and let the story of a princess of Mars carry you to a place far beyond our world. A place where heroes are made and legends are born. Let's begin. Chapter 7. Child Raising on Mars After Breakfast, which was a replica of the meal from the previous day, and an indicator of practically every meal I would have during my time with the Green Men of Mars. Sola escorted me to the plaza. There, I found the entire community engaged in either watching or assisting with the harnessing of massive mastodon-like animals to enormous three-wheeled chariots. There were about 250 of these vehicles, each drawn by a single animal. Judging by their appearance, any one of these beasts could easily have pulled an entire wagon train fully loaded. The chariots themselves were large, commodious, and gorgeously decorated. Each vehicle seated a female Martian adorned with ornaments of metal, jewels, silks, and furs. On the back of each animal was perched a young Martian driver. Like the mounts ridden by the warriors, these heavy draft animals wore neither bit nor bridle, as they were guided entirely by telepathic means. This telepathic ability is highly developed among all Martians, accounting for the simplicity of their spoken language and the relatively few words exchanged even during long conversations. It serves as a universal language on Mars, enabling communication between species and individuals to varying degrees, depending on their intellectual capacities and personal development. As the procession began, forming a single file line, Sola pulled me into an empty chariot, and we joined the caravan. The procession moved toward the city's entrance, which I had passed through the previous day. Leading the cavalcade were 200 warriors, 5 abreast, with an equal number bringing up the rear. 25 or 30 outriders flanked us on either side. Everyone except me, men, women, and children, was heavily armed. A Martian hound trotted behind each chariot, including my own faithful beast, who never left my side willingly during my entire decade on Mars. Our journey led us across a small valley, through the hills, and down into the desolate sea bottom I had crossed on my way from the incubator to the plaza. The incubator, as it turned out, was the destination of our journey that day. Once we reached the flat expanse of the sea bottom, the entire caravan broke into a gallop and soon arrived at our goal. Upon arrival, the chariots were parked with military precision around the 4 sides of the enclosure. A group of warriors, led by a massive chieftain and including Tars Tarkas and other lesser leaders, dismounted and approached the incubator. The chief, whose name translated to English as Lorquas Tamil, carried the title of Jed. I soon understood the topic of their conversation, when Tars Tarka summoned Sola and instructed her to send me over. By this time, I had mastered the intricacies of walking under Martian conditions, and I quickly responded to his command. I approached the side of the incubator where the warriors stood. Upon reaching them, I saw that most of the eggs had hatched. The incubator was teeming with the hideous little creatures, which ranged from 3 to 4 feet in height and moved restlessly, as if searching for food. Tars Tarkas pointed to the incubator and commanded, "Sack." Realizing he wanted me to repeat my leap from the previous day for Lorqua's Tommel's benefit, I obliged. Leaping over the parked chariots on the far side of the incubator, I returned to find Lorqua's Tommel grunting his approval. He issued a few commands regarding the incubator, after which I was free to observe their activities. The warriors broke an opening in the incubator wall large enough for the young Martians to exit. 2 solid walls formed by women and younger Martians lined the path leading through the chariots and out onto the plain beyond. The hatchlings scampered between these walls like wild deer, running the full length of the aisle until they were caught by the women or older children at the far end. The first little one to reach the end of the gauntlet was caught by the last woman in the line, the second by her counterpart, and so on until all the hatchlings had been claimed. The women then returned to their respective chariots, while the young men who had caught some of the creatures later handed them over to the women. I saw that the ceremony, if it could be dignified by such a name, was over. Seeking out Sola, I found her in our chariot holding a hideous little creature tightly in her arms. The task of rearing young green Martians consists solely of teaching them to speak and to use the weapons of warfare with which they are burdened from their very first year of life. Emerging from eggs in which they have incubated for 5 years, they step into the world fully developed, except for their size. Entirely unknown to their mothers who, in turn, would have difficulty identifying their fathers, they are the communal children of their tribe. Their education falls to the females who happen to capture them as they leave the incubator. These foster mothers may not have had an egg in the incubator, as was the case with Sola. She had not laid eggs until less than a year before she became the surrogate mother to another woman's offspring. However, this matters little to the Green Martians, as parental and filial love is as unknown to them as it is common among us. I believe this cruel system, carried on for countless generations, has directly contributed to the loss of finer feelings and higher humanitarian instincts in these poor creatures. From birth, they know neither father nor motherly affection, nor do they understand the concept of home. They are taught that their existence is tolerated only as long as they prove their physical strength and ferocity. Deformed or defective young are promptly executed, and no tears are shed for the many hardships they endure from infancy. This harshness is not the result of unnecessary or intentional cruelty. Rather, it is a byproduct of their harsh, pitiless struggle for survival on a dying planet. Mars's natural resources have dwindled to such an extent that every additional life imposes a significant burden on the community. Through careful selection, they rear only the hardiest specimens of each generation. With almost supernatural foresight, they regulate their birth rate to balance deaths in the community. Each adult female lays approximately 13 eggs annually. Only those meeting strict size, weight, and density criteria are preserved, hidden in subterranean vaults where the temperature prevents premature incubation. These eggs are inspected annually by a council of 20 chieftains. Of the thousands produced each year, only about 100 are retained, while the rest are destroyed. After 5 years, around 500 of the most perfect eggs are placed in nearly airtight incubators, where they are hatched by the sun's rays over another 5 years. The hatching ceremony we witnessed today was a typical example. Nearly all the eggs hatched within 2 days. Any eggs that failed to hatch were discarded, as their offspring might pass on a tendency for prolonged incubation, disrupting the precise timing the Martians have maintained for ages. This timing allows them to predict the incubators opening almost to the hour. Incubators are built in remote locations to prevent discovery by rival tribes. Such a catastrophe would mean no children for the community for 5 years. Later, I was to witness the consequences of an alien incubator being discovered. The Green Martian community I was part of numbered about 30,000. They roamed a vast tract of arid and semi-arid land between 40 and 80 degrees south latitude, bordered by fertile regions to the east and west. Their headquarters lay near the southwest corner of this territory, at the intersection of 2 Martian canals. The incubator had been placed far north of their territory in an uninhabited area, requiring a long journey. Upon returning to the dead city, I spent several idle days. The warriors had ridden out early the day after our return, retrieving eggs from subterranean vaults and transporting them to the incubator. The incubator was then sealed for another 5 years, unlikely to be revisited during that time. The vaults were many miles south of the incubator and visited yearly by the Council of Chieftains. Why they didn't build the vaults and incubators closer to their home remained a mystery to me, like many other Martian practices, unsolvable through earthly reasoning. Zola's duties doubled after she became responsible for the young Martian and me. However, neither of us required much attention. Being at a similar stage of Martian education, Zola decided to train us together. Her prize was a male about 4 feet tall, strong and physically perfect. He learned quickly, and we shared a keen rivalry that I found quite amusing. The Martian language, as I have mentioned, is simple. Within a week, I could make my needs understood and comprehend nearly everything said to me. Under Zola's guidance, I also developed telepathic abilities, soon sensing nearly everything happening around me. What puzzled Zola most was that, while I could receive telepathic messages, even unintended ones, no one could read my thoughts. Initially, this vexed me, but I later came to value this ability, as it gave me a distinct advantage over the Martians. Chapter 8. A Fair Captive from the Sky. The 3rd day after the incubator ceremony, we set forth toward home. But scarcely had the head of the procession emerged onto the open ground outside the city, when orders were given for an immediate and hasty retreat. As though trained for years in this maneuver, the Green Martians vanished like mist into the spacious doorways of the nearby buildings. In less than 3 minutes, the entire cavalcade of chariots, mastodons, and mounted warriors had disappeared from sight. Zola and I entered a building near the city's edge, the same one where I had previously encountered the apes. Curious about the cause of the sudden retreat, I climbed to an upper floor and looked out over the valley and hills beyond. There, I saw the reason for the commotion. A massive craft, long, low, and painted gray, was gliding slowly over the crest of the nearest hill. Following it came another and another, until 20 of these great ships sailed in majestic procession, low above the ground, toward the city. Each vessel carried a strange banner stretched from stem to stern, and an odd device painted on the prow gleamed in the sunlight, visible even from my distant vantage point. I could see figures crowded on the forward decks and upper works of the airships. Whether they had discovered us or were simply surveying the deserted city, I could not say. Suddenly and without warning, the Green Martian warriors fired a devastating volley from the windows of the buildings overlooking the valley. The ships, advancing peacefully moments before, were now met with fierce resistance. The scene changed instantly. The foremost vessel swung broadside to return fire, its guns blazing as it maneuvered in a wide arc, evidently attempting to circle back into a strategic position. The other ships followed in its wake, each opening fire as they moved into position. However, the fire from our warriors never faltered. I doubt if more than 25% of their shots missed their marks. It was the first time I had witnessed such deadly precision. With each explosion, it seemed a figure on the airships fell, while their banners and upper works disintegrated in bursts of flame as our warriors' projectiles tore through them. The ships' return fire was largely ineffective, as the first surprise volley had caught their crews unprepared and left their sighting apparatus vulnerable. Green Martian warriors are trained to target specific points during battle. The best marksmen focused their fire on the wireless and sighting equipment of the enemy's large guns. Others attacked the smaller weapons, while still others picked off gunners, officers, or crew. Some concentrated on the upper works, steering gear, and propellers. After 20 minutes of relentless assault, the fleet began retreating in the direction from which it had come. Several ships were visibly damaged, limping along with depleted crews. Their fire had ceased entirely, and their sole focus appeared to be escape. The Green Martian warriors rushed to the rooftops to continue their fusillade as the Armada withdrew. One by one, the ships disappeared behind the crests of the distant hills until only a single, barely moving craft remained in sight. This last ship had borne the brunt of our fire. It drifted aimlessly, apparently unmanned, as no figures moved on its decks. Slowly, it veered off course, circling back toward the city in an erratic and pitiful manner. The warriors ceased firing, recognizing that the vessel was helpless and posed no threat. As the ship drifted closer, the warriors ventured out onto the plain to intercept it. However, the craft was still floating about 50 feet above the ground, out of reach. From my vantage point at the window, I could see the bodies of its crew strewn across the deck, though I could not discern their nature or species. The ship, carried by a light breeze, continued southeast, headed toward a row of buildings about a mile from our position. A group of warriors galloped ahead, dismounted, and entered the buildings she seemed destined to strike. Just before the craft collided with the structure, the Martians swarmed onto her from the windows, using their great spears to ease the shock of the impact. In moments, they had thrown out grappling hooks, and the vessel was being hauled down by the warriors on the ground. After securing the ship, the warriors swarmed aboard and began a thorough search from stem to stern. I watched as they examined the dead sailors, evidently looking for signs of life. Presently, a group emerged from below decks, dragging a small figure with them. The creature was significantly smaller than the Green Martian warriors, less than half their height, and from my balcony, I could see that it walked upright on two legs. I surmised it was some new and strange Martian species with which I had not yet become acquainted. They lowered their captive to the ground and began systematically looting the vessel. This operation took several hours, during which numerous chariots were requisitioned to transport the spoils. The loot included arms, ammunition, silks, furs, jewels, intricately carved stone vessels, and a variety of solid foods and liquids, including several casks of water, the first I had seen since arriving on Mars. Once the ship was emptied, the warriors tied ropes to it and towed it far out into the valley, heading southwest. A small group remained aboard, busily engaged in what appeared to be the emptying of various carboys over the decks and the bodies of the deceased sailors. When this task was complete, the warriors hastily disembarked, sliding down the guy ropes to the ground. The last warrior to leave the deck turned, tossed an object back onto the vessel, and paused to observe the result of his action. A faint burst of flame erupted where the object landed. Satisfied, he swung over the side and joined the others on the ground. Scarcely had he alighted when the guy ropes were simultaneously released. The now lightened warship, relieved of its cargo, rose majestically into the air, her decks and superstructure engulfed in roaring flames. The burning vessel drifted southeast, climbing higher and higher as the flames consumed her wooden components and reduced her weight. I ascended to the roof of the building to watch her slow ascent, captivated for hours until she disappeared into the distant horizon. The sight was awe-inspiring, a floating funeral pyre, adrift and unmanned, navigating the desolate Martian heavens. It was a derelict of death and destruction, a tragic symbol of the violent and ruthless existence of these strange, ferocious creatures. Deeply depressed, and for reasons I could not fully understand, I descended slowly to the street. The scene I had witnessed seemed less like a triumphant routing of an enemy and more like the senseless annihilation of a kindred people. A strange longing stirred within me, a yearning for these unknown foes, and an irrational hope rose in my chest that the fleet might return to demand justice from the green Martians for their unprovoked and ruthless attack. Close at my heel, in his now accustomed place, Woola, my faithful hound, and as I emerged upon the street, Sola rushed up to me as though I had been the object of some search on her part. The cavalcade was returning to the plaza, and the march homeward had been postponed for the day. In fact, it was not resumed for more than a week due to fears of a retaliatory attack by the airships. Lorquas Tommel, the shrewd and experienced chieftain, wisely chose not to risk being caught on the open plains with a caravan of chariots and children. Thus, we remained in the deserted city until the danger seemed to have passed. As Sola and I entered the plaza, a scene unfolded that filled me with a tumult of emotions: hope, fear, exultation, and despair. Most dominant, however, was an overwhelming sense of relief and happiness. Amid the throng of Martians, I caught a glimpse of the prisoner from the captured battlecraft. She was being roughly dragged into a nearby building by two green Martian females. The sight froze me in place. Before me stood a slender, girlish figure, unmistakably similar to the women of Earth I had left behind. She didn't notice me at first, but just as she was being forced through the portal of what would become her prison, she turned, and our eyes met. Her face was strikingly beautiful oval, with finely chiseled features, large and luminous eyes, and a cascade of coal-black, wavy hair arranged in an unusual yet elegant style. Her skin was a light reddish copper tone, against which the crimson glow of her cheeks and the natural red of her perfectly shaped lips stood out with captivating brilliance. She wore no clothing, like the green Martians who escorted her, but adorned herself with intricate ornaments. Yet her beauty and perfect symmetry required no adornment. When her gaze met mine, her eyes widened in astonishment, and she made a small gesture with her free hand, a signal I did not understand. For a moment, we looked at each other, and I saw hope and renewed courage brighten her face. But the expression faded, replaced by one of dejection, loathing, and contempt. It struck me then that her gesture must have been an appeal for protection, one that my ignorance of Martian customs had prevented me from answering. Before I could act or call out, she was dragged out of sight into the depths of the deserted edifice, leaving me to wrestle with my helplessness and regret. Chapter 9. I learned the language. As I came back to myself, I glanced at Sola, who had witnessed the encounter. I was surprised to notice a strange expression on her usually impassive face. What her thoughts were, I did not know, for I had only learned enough of the Martian tongue to meet my daily needs. As I reached the doorway of our building, a peculiar surprise awaited me. A warrior approached bearing the arms, ornaments, and accoutrements of his kind. He presented them to me with a few unintelligible words, accompanied by a bearing that was both respectful and menacing. Later, Sola, with the help of several other women, remodeled the trappings to fit my smaller frame. Once they had completed the work, I found myself garbed in all the panoply of war. From then on, Sola instructed me in the use of the various weapons, and I spent several hours each day practicing with the young Martians in the plaza. Though I was not yet proficient with all the weapons, my familiarity with similar earthly implements made me an unusually quick learner. I progressed in a satisfactory manner. The training of both myself and the young Martians was handled solely by the women. They were responsible not only for the education of the young in the arts of individual defense and offense, but also for the production of all manufactured goods. The women crafted everything of value, including firearms, ammunition, and even the powder. In times of war, they formed part of the reserves and fought with even greater intelligence and ferocity than the men. The men, in contrast, were trained in the higher strategies of war, including the maneuvering of large bodies of troops. They also made laws as needed, unfettered by precedent. Justice among the Martians was swift and direct, without the encumbrance of lawyers. In one respect, at least, they were a happy people. I did not see the prisoner again for several days after our first encounter. When I did, it was only a fleeting glimpse as she was being led to the great audience chamber where I had first met Lorqua's Tummel. I noted with dismay the unnecessary harshness and brutality with which her guards treated her. Their behavior was in stark contrast to Sola's maternal kindness toward me and the respect shown by the few Martians who bothered to notice me at all. On the 2 occasions I had seen her, the prisoner had exchanged words with her guards, which convinced me they spoke a common language. This realization spurred me to hasten my own education in Martian, nearly driving Sola to distraction with my demands. Within a few more days, I had mastered the language well enough to hold a passable conversation and understand nearly everything I heard. At this time, our sleeping quarters were occupied by 3 or 4 females, a couple of the recently hatched young, Sola, her youthful ward, Woola the Hound, and myself. After retiring for the night, the adults often engaged in desultory conversation before falling asleep. Now that I could understand their language, I listened intently, though I rarely contributed. On the night following the prisoner's visit to the audience chamber, the conversation turned to her. I was instantly alert. I had refrained from questioning Sola about the captive, wary of the strange expression I had noted on her face during our first encounter. Whether it signified jealousy or something else, I could not say. Still adhering to earthly standards, I deemed it safer to feign indifference until I better understood Sola's attitude. Sarkoya, one of the older women who shared our quarters, had been present at the audience as one of the prisoner's guards. The others turned to her for information. "When will we witness the death throes of the Red One?" One of the women asked. "Or does Lorqua's Tommel, the Jed, intend to hold her for ransom?" "They have decided to take her to Thark," replied Sarkoya, "to exhibit her final agonies at the great games before Tal Hagis." "What will be the manner of her death?" Sola inquired. "She is small and very beautiful. I had hoped they would hold her for ransom." Sarkoya and the other women grunted angrily at this perceived weakness on Sola's part. "It is sad, Sola, that you were not born 1,000,000 years ago," Sarkoya snapped. "When the land was filled with water, and the people were as soft as the stuff they sailed upon. Such sentiments mark you as weak and degenerate. Tarkas would not entrust you with the responsibilities of motherhood if he knew of your feelings. I see no harm in expressing interest in this red woman, Sola retorted. She has done us no wrong and would not harm us had we fallen into her hands. It is only the men of her kind who war upon us, and I believe their enmity mirrors our own toward them. They live at peace with their fellows, except when duty compels them to war. We, on the other hand, are at peace with no one, not even among ourselves. From the moment we break the shell to the time we embrace the river of mystery, our lives are a never-ending cycle of bloodshed. Fortunate is the one who meets an early end. This wild outburst shocked the other women into silence. After a few muttered reprimands, they lapsed into sleep. The episode reassured me of Sola's friendliness toward the captive. It also confirmed how fortunate I was to have fallen into her hands rather than those of the others. I knew that she was fond of me, and now that I had discovered that she hated cruelty and barbarity, I was confident that I could trust her to aid both the prisoner and me in escaping, provided of course that such a thing was within the range of possibilities. Though I didn't know what awaited us outside, I was willing to take my chances among people fashioned more like myself, rather than remain among the bloodthirsty green Martians. With this resolution, I decided to confide in Sola at the first opportunity. Feeling hopeful, I settled into the silks and furs of my Martian bed and drifted into the dreamless, refreshing sleep of Mars. Chapter 10. Champion and Chief. Early the next morning, I was up and about. Sola had informed me that I was allowed considerable freedom, as long as I did not attempt to leave the city. She had warned me, however, against venturing out unarmed. Like all other deserted metropolises of ancient Martian civilization, this city was inhabited by the great white apes I had encountered during my second day on Mars. Sola had also explained that Woola would prevent me from leaving the city's boundaries if I attempted it. She warned me not to arouse his fierce nature by ignoring his warnings should I approach forbidden territory. His nature, she said, was such that he would bring me back dead or alive if I persisted in opposing him. Preferably dead, she added. That morning, I chose a new street to explore. Before long, I found myself at the edge of the city, where low hills were punctuated by narrow, inviting ravines. The landscape beyond the hills filled me with a longing to explore, to climb their summits, and to view what lay beyond, true to the pioneering spirit of my earthly lineage. I also saw this as an opportunity to test Woola's loyalty. I was convinced the brute loved me. I had seen more evidence of affection in him than in any other Martian creature, man or beast. I believed that his gratitude for the times I had saved his life would outweigh his loyalty to the cruel and loveless masters who had imposed his duty upon him. As I approached the boundary, Woola ran anxiously ahead of me, pressing his massive body against my legs. His expression was more pleading than ferocious. He did not bare his tusks or emit his guttural warnings. Denied the companionship of my own kind, I had developed considerable affection for both Woola and Sola. As a normal earthly man must have some outlet for his natural affections, I decided to appeal to the same instinct in this great brute, confident I would not be disappointed. Although I had never petted or fondled Woola before, I now sat on the ground, wrapped my arms around his thick neck, and stroked him, speaking in my newly learned Martian tongue as I would to a dog back home or any other loyal animal. His response to my manifestation of affection was remarkable to a degree. Woola stretched his massive mouth wide, baring his tusks and wrinkling his snout until his great eyes nearly disappeared beneath folds of flesh. If you've ever seen a collie smile, you might have some idea of Woola's facial distortion. He threw himself on his back, rolling and wriggling at my feet like a playful puppy. Then he sprang upon me, his great weight knocking me to the ground. He squirmed around me, presenting his back for petting like a creature craving affection. I couldn't resist the absurdity of the scene and burst into laughter the first time I had laughed in many days. In fact, it was the first since Powell had left camp and his long unridden horse had bucked him headfirst into a pot of friolas. My laughter frightened Woola, and he stopped playing. Crawling toward me pitifully, he poked his ugly head into my lap. It was then I remembered what laughter signified on Mars: torture, suffering, or death. Quickly, I quieted myself and rubbed his head and back, speaking softly to reassure him. Then, in an authoritative tone, I commanded him to follow me. Rising, I started toward the hills. There was no further question of authority between us. From that moment on, Woola became my devoted slave, and I his undisputed master. My walk to the hills took only a few minutes and yielded little of interest. I saw brilliantly colored and unusually shaped wildflowers dotting the ravines. From the summit of the first hill, I could see additional hills stretching northward, rising range upon range until they culminated in mountains of respectable dimensions. Later, I learned that only a few peaks on all of Mars exceeded 4,000 feet in height. The impression of grandeur was relative. The morning's walk was significant for me because it solidified my bond with Woola, whom Tarstarkas had relied upon to guard me. I realized that, while technically a prisoner, I was now virtually free. I hurried back to the city before Woola's newfound allegiance could be discovered by his former masters. This adventure resolved me never again to leave the city limits until I was ready to escape for good. Doing so would surely result in a loss of my liberties and, perhaps, the death of Woola. When I returned to the plaza, I caught my third glimpse of the captive girl. She stood with her guards at the entrance to the audience chamber. As I approached, she gave me a single haughty glance before turning her back on me completely. The gesture was so human, so womanly, that while it stung my pride, it also warmed my heart. It was comforting to know that someone else on Mars shared my civilized instincts, even though her display of them was painful and mortifying. Had a green Martian woman wished to show contempt, she likely would have done so with a sword thrust or a pull of a trigger. But as their sentiments are largely atrophied, it would have required a grave injury to provoke such feelings in them. Sola, however, was an exception. I never saw her perform a cruel act or fail in kindness and good nature. Indeed, as one of her fellow Martians once described her, Sola was an atavism, a dear and precious throwback to a long-lost type of loving ancestor. Seeing that the prisoner seemed to be the center of attention, I halted to observe the proceedings. I didn't have to wait long, for Lorquas Tommel and his retinue of chieftains soon approached the building. Signaling the guards to follow with the prisoner, they entered the audience chamber. Realizing I was somewhat of a favored character, and convinced that the warriors did not yet know of my proficiency in their language, a secret I had begged Sola to keep so I could master the Martian tongue in peace, I decided to attempt entry into the chamber to listen to the proceedings. The council squatted on the steps of the rostrum, with the prisoner and her two guards standing below them. I recognized one of the guards as Sarkoia, which explained her presence at the hearing reported in our dormitory the previous night. Her demeanor toward the captive was harsh and brutal. She twisted the girl's arms, dug her rudimentary nails into her flesh, and shoved her roughly whenever she was required to move. Sarkoya seemed to vent all the hatred, cruelty, and spite of her 900 years, compounded by unguessable ages of fierce, brutal ancestors, upon the helpless girl. The other guard, in contrast, was indifferent. If the prisoner had been left solely in her care, fortunately, she was at night, the girl would have received neither cruelty nor any attention. When Lorquas Tommel raised his eyes to address the prisoner, they fell on me. He turned to Tars Tarkas with a word and an impatient gesture. Tars Tarkas replied with something I couldn't catch, which caused Lorquas Tommel to smile briefly before they both turned their attention back to the matter at hand. "What is your name?" asked Lorquas Tommel, addressing the prisoner. "Dejathoris, daughter of Mor's Kayak of Helium," she replied. "And the nature of your expedition?" he continued. "It was a purely scientific research mission sent by my grandfather, the Jeddak of Helium, to rechart the air currents and conduct atmospheric density tests." The prisoner answered in a clear, well-modulated voice. She continued, "We were unprepared for battle, as our banners and the colors of our craft clearly indicated our peaceful mission. Our work was as much in your interest as ours. For generations, we have maintained Mars's air and water supply at sustainable levels despite the interference of the Green Men. Without our efforts, there would not be enough air or water to sustain even one human life on Barsoom. Why, oh why, can you not learn to live in amity with your fellows? Must you continue down the ages to your final extinction, rising no higher than the beasts that serve you? A people without a written language, without art, without homes, and without love, victims of the horrible communal system. Owning everything in common has left you owning nothing in common. You hate each other as much as you hate all else. Come back to the ways of our common ancestors. Return to the light of kindness and fellowship. The red men stretch out their hands to you. Together, we could do even more to regenerate our dying planet. The granddaughter of the greatest Jeddak of the Red Men asks you, will you come?" For several moments after she finished speaking, Lorquas Tommel and the other warriors sat in silence, their gazes fixed intently on her. What thoughts passed through their minds, no one can say, but I believe they were moved. Had one among them risen above custom, that moment could have marked the dawn of a new era on Mars. Tars Tarkas rose to speak, his face reflecting an internal struggle. I saw a fleeting expression of kindliness and benignity cross his fierce features. What words of moment were to have fallen from his lips were never spoken, as just there was a young warrior, evidently sensing the trend of thought among the older men, leaped down from the steps of the rostrum, striking Dejathoris a powerful blow across the face that felled her to the floor. He planted his foot on her prostrate form and broke into a peal of horrid, mirthless laughter. For an instant, I thought Tars Tarkas or Lorquas Tommel would strike him dead. But the moment passed, and their old selves reasserted control. They smiled faintly, though they did not laugh. A telling omission in a society where such an act would usually provoke uproarious laughter. I had no time to consider their reactions, for as the warrior raised his hand to strike again, I was already in motion. With a single bound, I was upon him. He was 12 feet tall and heavily armed, but my rage made me a match for any Martian. Springing upward, I struck him full in the face, then leaped again, drawing my short sword and landing on his chest. Clinging to his tusk with one hand and bracing a foot against his pistol, I delivered blow after blow to his enormous chest. He could not use his short sword to advantage because I was too close to him, nor could he draw his pistol, which he attempted to do in direct opposition to Martian custom, which says that you may not fight a fellow warrior in private combat with any other than the weapon with which you are attacked. In fact, he could do nothing much make a wild and futile attempt to dislodge me. He was unable to effectively use his weapons, and within moments he collapsed, lifeless, to the floor. Degethoris, propped on one elbow, stared wide-eyed as I stood over the fallen warrior. Again, no Martian interfered with me, and tearing a piece of silk from my cape, I endeavored to staunch the flow of blood from her nostrils. When she could speak, she placed her hand on my arm and asked, "Why did you do it? You, who refused me even friendly recognition in the first hour of my peril. And now you risk your life and kill one of your companions for my sake. What manner of man are you? Are you human or something more?" "It is a strange tale," I replied. "Too long to attempt to tell you now. When I doubt, even I fully believe. For now, know that I am your friend and, as far as our captors allow, your protector and servant. Then you are a prisoner? But why then those arms and the regalia of a Tharkian chieftain? What is your name? Where your country?" "Yes, Degethoris, I too am a prisoner. My name is John Carter, and I claim Virginia, one of the United States of America, Earth as my home. But why I am permitted to wear arms I do not know, nor was I aware that my regalia was that of a chieftain." We were interrupted at this juncture by the approach of one of the warriors bearing arms, accoutrements, and ornaments. In a flash, one of her questions was answered, and a puzzle cleared up for me. I saw that the body of my dead antagonist had been stripped, and I recognized in the respectful yet menacing demeanor of the warrior who brought me these trophies the same attitude shown by the one who had previously delivered my initial equipment. For the first time, I realized that my blow during the earlier battle in the audience chamber had resulted in my adversary's death. The reason for the treatment I had received now became apparent. I had won my spurs, so to speak. In the crude justice that marks Martian dealings, justice which has led me to call Mars the planet of paradoxes, I was accorded the honors due a conqueror, the trappings and position of the warrior I had killed. In truth, I was now a Martian chieftain. I later learned this was the cause of my considerable freedom and toleration in the audience chamber. As I turned to receive the dead warrior's belongings, I noticed Tarkas and several others pushing forward. Tarkas's eyes rested on me with a most quizzical expression. Finally, he addressed me. "You speak the tongue of Barsoom quite readily for one who was deaf and dumb to us a few short days ago. Where did you learn it, John Carter?" "You, yourself, are responsible, Tarkas," I replied. "You provided me with an instructress of remarkable ability. I have Sola to thank for my learning." "She has done well," he answered, "but your education in other respects needs considerable polish. Do you know what your unprecedented temerity would have cost you had you failed to kill either of the two chieftains whose medal you now wear?" "I presume that the one I failed to kill would have killed me," I answered with a smile. "No, you are wrong. Only in the last extremity of self-defense would a Martian warrior kill a prisoner. We prefer to save them for other purposes." His face betrayed possibilities that were unpleasant to dwell upon. "But one thing can save you now," he continued. "Should you, in recognition of your remarkable valor, ferocity, and prowess, be deemed worthy by Talhages, you may be taken into the community and become a full-fledged Tharkian. Until we reach the headquarters of Talhages, it is Lorquist Tommel's will that you be accorded the respect your acts have earned you. You will be treated as a Tharkian chieftain, but do not forget that every chief who outranks you is responsible for your safe delivery to our mighty and most ferocious ruler. I am done." "I hear you, Tarsarkas," I replied. "As you know, I am not of Barsoom. Your ways are not my ways. I can only act, as I have in the past, in accordance with the dictates of my conscience and the standards of my own people. If you leave me in peace, I will go in peace. But if not, let any Barsoomian who crosses my path respect my rights as a stranger among you or face the consequences. One thing is certain. Whatever your ultimate intentions toward this unfortunate young woman, anyone who injures or insults her in the future will have to answer to me. I understand you belittle sentiments of generosity and kindness, but I do not. I will prove to any warrior that these qualities are not incompatible with the ability to fight. Ordinarily, I am not one for long speeches, nor had I ever resorted to bombast before. Yet I sensed that my words would strike a chord among the Green Martians, and I was right. My speech deeply impressed them, and their attitude toward me became even more respectful. Tarkas himself seemed pleased, though his only comment was enigmatic. And I think I know Tal Hages, Jedek of Thark. Turning my attention to Dejathoris, I helped her to her feet and led her toward the exit, ignoring the hovering guards and the inquisitive glances of the chieftains. Was I not a chieftain now as well? Then I would assume the responsibilities of one. They did not hinder us, and thus Dejathoris, Princess of Helium, and John Carter, Gentleman of Virginia, followed by the faithful Woola, passed in utter silence from the audience chamber of Lorquas Tamil, Jed among the Tharks of Barsoom. Chapter 11. With Dejathoris. As we reached the open, the two female guards who had been assigned to watch over Dejathoris hurried up and made as though to assume custody of her once more. The poor child shrank against me, and I felt her two small hands grip tightly around my arm. Waving the women away, I informed them that Sola would now attend to the captive. I further warned Sarkoya that any more of her cruel attentions toward Dejathoris would result in Sarkoja's sudden and painful demise. Unfortunately, my threat caused more harm than good for Dejathoris. As I later learned, Martian men do not kill women, nor do women kill men. Sarkoya merely gave us an ugly look and departed to hatch up deviltries against us. I quickly found Sola and explained that I wished her to guard Dejathoris as she had guarded me. I also asked her to find new quarters where they would not be harassed by Sarkoya. Finally, I informed her that I would take up my quarters among the men. Sola glanced at the accoutrements I carried in my hand and slung over my shoulder. "You are a great chieftain now, John Carter," she said, "and I must obey your commands, though I would gladly do so under any circumstances. The man whose medal you carry was young but a great warrior. By his promotions and kills, he had risen close to the rank of Tarkas, who, as you know, is second only to Lorquas Tamil. You are now 11th. Only 10 chieftains in this community outrank you in prowess. And if I were to kill Lorquas Tamil?" I asked. "You would be first, John Carter, but you may only achieve that honor by the will of the entire council, which must consent to Lorquas Tamil meeting you in combat. Alternatively, should he attack you, you may kill him in self-defense and thereby claim first place." I laughed and changed the subject. I had no particular desire to kill Lorquas Tamil, and even less to be a Jed among the Tharks. I accompanied Sola and Dejathoris in a search for new quarters, which we found in a building closer to the audience chamber. This structure was far more impressive than our former dwelling. Inside, we discovered real sleeping quarters with ancient beds of intricately wrought metal, suspended from marble ceilings by enormous golden chains. The walls were richly decorated, and unlike the frescoes in other buildings I had examined, these included numerous depictions of human figures. These figures resembled me, but were of a lighter complexion than Dejathoris. They were dressed in graceful, flowing robes adorned with metal and jewels, and their luxuriant hair shone in beautiful shades of gold and reddish bronze. The men were beardless, and only a few bore weapons. Most of the scenes depicted fair-skinned, fair-haired people at play. Dejathoris clasped her hands with an exclamation of rapture as she gazed at these magnificent works of art created by a people long extinct. Sola, on the other hand, seemed entirely indifferent to them. We decided that this second-floor room, overlooking the plaza, would serve as living quarters for Dejathoris and Sola. An adjoining rear room would be used for cooking and supplies. I then sent Sola to fetch bedding, food, and any necessary utensils, assuring her that I would guard Dejathoris until her return. As Sola departed, Dejathoris turned to me with a faint smile. "And where would your prisoner escape to if you were to leave her?" she asked. "Unless, of course, it was to follow you, seek your protection, and ask pardon for the cruel thoughts she has harbored against you these past days." "You are right," I answered. "There is no escape for either of us unless we go together." "I heard your challenge to the creature you call Tars Tarkas," she continued, "and I think I understand your position among these people. But what I cannot comprehend is your claim that you are not of Barsoom." "In the name of my first ancestor, then," she said. "Where do you come from? You resemble my people, yet you are so unlike. You speak my language, yet I heard you tell Tars Tarkas that you learned it only recently. All Barsoomians speak the same tongue from the ice-clad south to the ice-clad north, though their written languages differ. Only in the Valley Door, where the river Esses empties into the lost Sea of Chorus, is a different language said to be spoken. Yet, except in the legends of our ancestors, there is no record of a Barsoomian returning from the shores of Chorus in the Valley Door. Do not tell me you have returned. They would kill you horribly anywhere on the surface of Barsoom if that were true. Tell me it is not so." Her eyes were filled with a strange, weird light. Her voice was pleading, and her little hands, reaching up upon my chest, pressed against me as though to wring a denial from my very heart. "I do not know your customs, Dejathoris," I said, "but in my own Virginia, a gentleman does not lie to save himself. I am not of Dor. I have never seen the mysterious Esses. The lost Sea of Chorus is still lost, so far as I am concerned. Do you believe me?" And then it struck me suddenly that I was very anxious she should believe me. It was not that I feared the consequences of a general belief that I had returned from the Barsoomian heaven or hell, or whatever it was. Why was it then? Why should I care what she thought? I looked down at her beautiful face upturned and her wonderful eyes opening to the very depths of her soul. As my gaze met hers, I knew why, and I shuddered. A similar wave of feeling seemed to stir her. She drew away from me with a sigh. With her earnest, beautiful face turned up to mine, she whispered, "I believe you, John Carter. I do not know what a gentleman is, nor have I ever heard before of Virginia. But on Barsoom, no man lies. If he does not wish to speak the truth, he is silent. Where is this Virginia, your country, John Carter?" she asked. It seemed that this fair name of my fair land had never sounded more beautiful than when it fell from those perfect lips on that far-gone day. "I am of another world," I answered, "the great planet Earth, which revolves about our common sun, next within the orbit of your Barsoom, which we know as Mars. How I came here, I cannot tell you, for I do not know. But here I am, and since my presence has allowed me to serve Dejathorus, I am glad that I am here." She gazed at me with troubled eyes, long and questioningly. That it was difficult to believe my statement, I well knew, nor could I hope she would. However much I craved her confidence and respect, I would much rather not have told her anything of my origins. But no man could look into the depths of those eyes and refuse the slightest request. Finally, she smiled and, rising, said, "I shall have to believe, even though I cannot understand. I can readily see that you are not of the Barsoom of today. You are like us, yet different. But why should I trouble my poor head with such a problem, when my heart tells me that I believe because I wish to believe?" It was good logic, good, earthly, feminine logic, and if it satisfied her, I certainly could not find fault with it. As a matter of fact, it was about the only kind of logic that could be applied to my problem. We then fell into a general conversation, asking and answering many questions on each side. She was curious about the customs of my people and displayed a remarkable knowledge of events on Earth. When I questioned her closely on this seeming familiarity with earthly things, she laughed and cried out, "Why, every schoolboy on Barsoom knows the geography and much about the fauna and flora, as well as the history of your planet, fully as well as he knows his own. Can we not see everything that takes place upon Earth, as you call it? Is it not hanging there in the heavens in plain sight?" This baffled me, I must confess, as much as my statements had confounded her, and I told her so. She then explained, in general, the instruments her people had used and perfected for ages, allowing them to project onto a screen a perfect image of what is transpiring upon any planet and even some of the stars. These pictures were so detailed that, when photographed and enlarged, objects no greater than a blade of grass could be distinctly recognized. I later saw many of these pictures in helium, as well as the instruments that produced them. "If you are so familiar with earthly things," I asked, "why do you not recognize me as identical to the inhabitants of that planet?" She smiled again, as one might when indulging a curious child. "Because, John Carter," she replied, "nearly every planet and star with atmospheric conditions like those of Barsoom shows forms of animal life almost identical to you and me. Furthermore, Earthmen almost without exception cover their bodies with strange, unsightly pieces of cloth and their heads with hideous contraptions, the purpose of which we have never understood. When you were found by the Tharkian warriors, you were entirely unadorned and unfigured. The fact that you wore no ornaments was strong proof of your un-Barsoomian origin, while the absence of grotesque coverings caused doubt about your earthliness. I then narrated the details of my departure from Earth, explaining that my body there had been fully clothed in all the garments of mundane dwellers. At this point, Sola returned with our meager belongings and her young Martian protege, who, of course, would have to share the quarters with them. Sola asked if we had had a visitor during her absence and seemed surprised when we answered in the negative. She said that as she had approached the upper floor where our quarters were located, she had seen Sarkoia descending. We decided that she must have been eavesdropping, but since nothing of great importance had passed between us, we dismissed the matter, merely resolving to be more cautious in the future. Dejathorus and I then examined the architecture and decorations of the beautiful chambers we occupied. She explained that these people had flourished over 100,000 years before. They were the early progenitors of her race, but had mixed with two other great races of early Martians, the dark, almost black race and the reddish-yellow race that had also flourished at the time. These three great divisions of higher Martians had formed a mighty alliance as the drying up of Martian seas forced them to seek the few fertile areas that remained and defend themselves against the wild hordes of green men. Ages of close relationship and intermarriage resulted in the race of red men, of which Dejathoris was a fair and beautiful daughter. During the long years of hardship and war, much of the high civilization and the arts of the fair-haired Martians were lost. However, the red race of today had reached a point where they believed their new discoveries and practical civilization had compensated for what lay irretrievably buried beneath the countless intervening ages. These ancient Martians had been highly cultivated and literary, but during those trying centuries of readjustment, their production ceased, and nearly all their records, archives, and literature were lost. Dejathoris shared many fascinating facts and legends about this lost race of noble people. She explained that the city where we camped was believed to have been a center of commerce and culture called Korid. Built on a beautiful natural harbor, it was encircled by magnificent hills. The little valley west of the city, she said, was all that remained of the harbor, while the passage through the hills to the old sea bottom had once been the channel for ships entering the city's gates. The shores of the ancient seas were dotted with cities, and smaller ones converged toward the ocean's center as people followed the receding waters until necessity forced upon them their ultimate salvation, the so-called Martian canals. We were so engrossed in our exploration and conversation that it was late in the afternoon before we noticed the time. A messenger soon arrived, bearing a summons from Lorquas Tommel, directing me to appear before him immediately, bidding Dejathoris and Sola farewell and instructing Willa to remain on guard. I hurried to the audience chamber, where Lorquas Tommel and Tars Tarkas seated upon the rostrum. Chapter 12. A Prisoner with Power. As I entered and saluted, Lorquas Tommel signaled me to advance, and, fixing his great, hideous eyes upon me, addressed me thus: "You have been with us a few days, yet during that time you have, by your prowess, won a high position among us. Be that as it may, you are not one of us, you owe us no allegiance." "Your position is a peculiar one," he continued. "You are a prisoner, yet you give commands which must be obeyed. You are an alien, yet you are a Tharkian chieftain. You are a midget, yet you can kill a mighty warrior with one blow of your fist. And now you are reported to have been plotting to escape with another prisoner of another race, a prisoner who, from her own admission, half believes you have returned from the Valley of Dor. Either one of these accusations, if proved, would be sufficient grounds for your execution. But we are a just people, and you shall have a trial on our return to Thark, if Tal Haegis so commands. But," he continued in his fierce, guttural tones, "if you run off with the red girl, it is I who shall have to account to Tal Haegis. It is I who shall have to face Tars Tarkas and either demonstrate my right to command or forfeit the medal from my dead carcass to a better man. For such is the custom of the Tharks. I have no quarrel with Tars Tarkas. Together, we rule supreme over the greatest of the lesser communities among the green men. We do not wish to fight between ourselves. And so if you were dead, John Carter, I should be glad. Under two conditions only may you be killed by us without orders from Tal Haegis. In personal combat and self-defense, should you attack one of us, or if you are apprehended in an attempt to escape. As a matter of justice, I must warn you that we only await one of these two excuses to rid ourselves of so great a responsibility. The safe delivery of the red girl to Tal Haegis is of the greatest importance. Not in 1,000 years have the Tharks made such a capture. She is the granddaughter of the greatest of the red Jedeks, who is also our bitterest enemy. I have spoken. The red girl has told us we are without the softer sentiments of humanity, but we are a just and truthful race. You may go." Turning, I left the audience chamber. So this was the beginning of Sarkoja's persecution. I knew that none other could be responsible for the report which had reached the ears of Lorquas Tommel so quickly. Now I recalled those portions of our conversation which had touched upon escape and my origin. Sarkoja was, at this time, Tars Tarkas's oldest and most trusted female. As such, she wielded mighty influence, for no warrior had the confidence of Lorquas Tommel to the extent of his ablest lieutenant, Tars Tarkas. However, instead of dismissing thoughts of possible escape, my audience with Lorquas Tommel only served to focus my every faculty on this subject. Now, more than ever, the absolute necessity for escape, particularly where Dejathoris was concerned, was impressed upon me. I was convinced that some horrible fate awaited her at the headquarters of Tal Hages. As described by Sola, this monster was the exaggerated personification of all the ages of cruelty, ferocity, and brutality from which he had descended. Cold, cunning, and calculating, he was also, in marked contrast to most of his fellows, a slave to that brute passion which the waning demands for procreation on their dying planet had almost stilled in the Martian breast. The thought that the divine Dejathoris might fall into the clutches of such an abysmal creature started a cold sweat upon me. Far better that we save friendly bullets for ourselves at the last moment, as had those brave frontier women of my lost homeland who took their own lives rather than fall into the hands of Indian braves. As I wandered about the plaza, lost in my gloomy forebodings, Tars Tarkas approached me on his way from the audience chamber. His demeanor toward me was unchanged, and he greeted me as though we had not just parted a few moments before. "Where are your quarters, John Carter?" he asked. "I have selected none," I replied. "It seemed best that I quarter either by myself or among the other warriors, and I was awaiting an opportunity to ask your advice. As you know," I added with a smile, "I am not yet familiar with all the customs of the Tharks. Come with me," he directed, and together we moved across the plaza to a building which, to my satisfaction, adjoined the one occupied by Sola and her charges. "My quarters are on the first floor of this building," he said, "and the second floor is fully occupied by warriors, but the third floor and those above are vacant. You may take your choice of these. I understand," he continued, "that you have given up your woman to the Red prisoner. Well, as you have said, your ways are not our ways, but you fight well enough to do as you please. If you wish to give your woman to a captive, it is your own affair. However, as a chieftain, you should have attendants. According to our customs, you may select any or all the females from the retinues of the chieftains whose metal you now wear." I thanked him, but assured him that I could get along nicely without assistance, except in preparing food. He promised to send women to assist me with cooking, care of my arms, and the manufacture of ammunition, which he said would be necessary. He also suggested that they bring sleeping silks and furs, which I now owned as spoils of combat, for the nights were cold, and I had none of my own. He promised to do so and departed. Left alone, I ascended the winding corridor to the upper floors in search of suitable quarters. The architectural beauty of the building was consistent with the others I had seen, and, as usual, I became absorbed in exploration and discovery. I finally chose a front room on the third floor, because this brought me nearer to Dejathoris, whose apartment was on the second floor of the adjoining building, and it flashed upon me that I could rig up some means of communication whereby she might signal me in case she needed either my services or my protection. Adjoining my sleeping apartment were baths, dressing rooms, and other sleeping and living quarters, totaling some 10 rooms on this floor. The windows of the back rooms overlooked an enormous court, which formed the center of the square made by the buildings facing the four contiguous streets. This court was now given over to the quartering of the various animals belonging to the warriors occupying the adjoining buildings. While the court was entirely overgrown with the yellow, moss-like vegetation that blankets practically the entire surface of Mars, numerous fountains, statues, benches, and pergola-like structures bore witness to the beauty the court must have presented in bygone times when it was graced by the fair-haired, laughing people. These people, driven not only from their homes, but from all except the vague legends of their descendants, had been victims of stern and unalterable cosmic laws. One could easily picture the gorgeous foliage of the luxuriant Martian vegetation, which once filled this scene with life and color, the graceful figures of the beautiful women, the straight and handsome men, the happy, frolicking children, all bathed in sunlight, happiness, and peace. It was difficult to realize that they had vanished, gone down through ages of darkness, cruelty, and ignorance, until the hereditary instincts of culture and humanitarianism had risen ascendant once more in the final composite race that now dominates Mars. My thoughts were cut short by the arrival of several young females bearing loads of weapons, silks, furs, jewels, cooking utensils, and casks of food and drink, including considerable loot from the aircraft. All this, it seemed, had been the property of the two chieftains I had slain, and now, by the customs of the Tharks, it had become mine. At my direction, they placed the items in one of the back rooms and then departed, only to return with a second load, which they informed me constituted the balance of my goods. On the second trip, they were accompanied by 10 or 15 other women and youths who, it seemed, had formed the retinues of the two chieftains. They were not their families, nor their wives, nor their servants. The relationship was peculiar and so unlike anything known to us that it is most difficult to describe. All property among the Green Martians is owned in common by the community, except for personal weapons, ornaments, and sleeping silks and furs of the individuals. These alone can one claim undisputed rights to, and no more of these may be accumulated than are required for actual needs. Any surplus is held merely as a custodian and passed on to the younger members of the community as necessity demands. The women and children of a man's retinue may be likened to a military unit for which he is responsible in various ways, such as instruction, discipline, sustenance, and the exigencies of their continual roamings and their unending strife with other communities and with the Red Martians. His women are in no sense wives. The Green Martians have no word corresponding in meaning to this earthly term. Their mating is solely a matter of community interest, directed without reference to natural selection. The Council of Chieftains of each community controls the matter as surely as the owner of a Kentucky racing stud directs the scientific breeding of his stock for the improvement of the whole. In theory, it may sound well, as is often the case with theories, but the results of ages of this unnatural practice, coupled with the community interest in the offspring being held paramount over that of the mother, is shown in the cold, cruel creatures and their gloomy, loveless, mirthless existence. It is true that the Green Martians are absolutely virtuous, both men and women, with the exception of such degenerates as Tall Hages, but better for a finer balance of human characteristics, even at the expense of a slight and occasional loss of chastity. Finding that I must assume responsibility for these creatures, whether I would or not, I made the best of it and directed them to find quarters on the upper floors, leaving the third floor to me. One of the girls I assigned the duties of a simple cuisine, and I directed the others to take up the various activities that had formerly constituted their vocations. Thereafter, I saw little of them, nor did I care to.
Thank you so much for joining me today and listening to the story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. If you liked today's tale, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to see you next time for another magical adventure. Until then, take care and keep imagining.